This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try and explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
Hi, I'm Neil Atkinson, and welcome to our weekly walk on the weird side. It is Planet X, where we cover everything from conspiracies to cover-ups, extraterrestrials to interdimensionals, the supernatural to the strange, and the suppressed news to the alternative views. And to help me out, we have our team of Planet experts. Tonight, I'm joined by the very lovely AMs and our special guest live from Hollywood. It's the brilliant Dr. Bruce Goldberg. We will be catching up with them very soon. Before we start the show, though, a couple of things to mention. We still have that competition running for the Exopolitics box sets. We've got DVD box sets for the second, the third, and the fourth British Exopolitics, plus 2 tickets to this year's event. So you can check that out online at planetxlive.co.uk. The other thing I wanted to mention before we start the show is something that we're going to be starting very soon called the Planet X Live Forum. I don't know anybody else who's doing this at the moment, so it could be another first for Planet X, but we're planning to put together a live Planet X Forum via Skype, hosted by our very own John O'Brien, who's going to be joined by other members of the Planet X team. How's it going to work? Well, the idea, and it is only going to be a pilot to start, so there might be a little bit of tweaking going on, but the idea is we're going to set a time and a night each week. It could become weekly or nightly even, and you'll be able to join us on our Planet X Skype group to air your views, and it's going to be an open forum, so you can chat about almost anything. It could be the current show, it could be stuff going on in the news, whatever you like. That's the live forum, which is going to be starting very soon. There are more details on the Facebook group or by going to the website, planetxlive.co.uk.
Planet X. The truth is on air.
And let's get straight into it. We've got our special guest live from good old sunny California in Hollywood. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is on the line. But before we get him on, let's get into some of his background.
Thrilled to bits to have Dr. Bruce Goldberg on. Dr. Goldberg originally trained and worked for many years as a dentist and then trained as a hypnotherapist. And he originally did this to use techniques to help his patients relax. He holds a BA degree in biology and chemistry. He's a doctor of dental surgery from the University of Maryland School of Dentistry and has a master's degree in counselling psychology. Eventually, he retired from dentistry to devote full-time his rapidly expanding international hypnotherapy practice, specialising in past life regression and future life progression hypnotherapy.
He has been the author of 21 best-selling and award-winning books, including Past Lives, Future Lives. And now this is the book that was written on progression hypnotherapy, taking patients into their future lives. His second book, The Search for Grace, was actually made into a television movie by CBS. He's been on some of the biggest radio and TV talk shows, including The Oprah Winfrey Show, also Coast to Coast with the legend that is George Norrie. He's also conducted more than 35,000 past life regressions and future life progressions, which we'll get into a little later on if you don't know what that's all about. He's helped thousands of patients to empower themselves through the use of his techniques. Also, he's developed the field of progression hypnotherapy along with the superconscious mind tap, a healing technique through hypnosis, which again sounds fascinating, which we really want to get into and explore more. He is the world's foremost authority on futuristic time travelers. His books, Time Travelers from Our Future and Egypt, an Extraterrestrial and Time Traveler Experiment, are the only books written on true accounts of these futuristic time travelers.
In his book, The Search for Grace, a wonderful book, the book was based upon the actual history of a woman who solves her murder from a previous life in order to avoid the same fate in her current life. And this case has been fully documented and stands out today as one of the most documented cases of reincarnation. In Dr. Goldberg's own words, for several years I was a practicing dentist using hypnosis on my dental patients while maintaining a separate and full-time practice using hypnosis to regress patients into their future and past lives. As my reputation spread, I gave up my dental practice and became the country's only full-time hypnotherapist specialising in past life regression and future life progression, a field which he himself developed.
And to finally quote Dr. Goldberg himself, and I love this, your imagination is the only limit of your experience as you explore the magic of hypnotherapy, and he believes that by using hypnotherapy, almost anything is possible. And I love it, AMs, when we have guests on who are great speakers, who are passionate about the work, and also, very importantly, are keen to share that knowledge. And Dr. Bruce Goldberg certainly ticks all those boxes.
Wonderful.
Tonight's show is not only going to be a fascinating one, but we're going to learn some cool stuff as well. So I got to say, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, welcome to Planet X.
Well, thank you. Listen, you guys have to learn how to give a longer introduction to your guests.
Well, we did.
By the way, I appreciate your referring to my dental background. Obviously, I'm retired from dentistry today, but you might say now I drill into the past and future.
I like that.
That's a good fun. I think it's important as well for our listeners to have a good understanding about your science background as well. That's well orthodox science.
My science background is I have 3 degrees in sciences. I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. I have a dental degree from the University of Maryland, and I also have a master's degree in counseling psychology. So I look upon this field from 3 perspectives. One is the medical perspective, because I deal with a lot of psychosomatic illness and treating people. You have to understand the way the body works. And then there is also the mind-body connection. So my psychological training is important to understand the way our psyche and the way our mind works. But then the big picture here is to combine everything as more of a metaphysician and a New Age-oriented person to show you how our awareness in the universe is actually all based on energy. And a way to simply understand this without, people go up and down, all this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of philosophies out there. But just think of, I like to use the way the universe is constructed and created as a way of what we call a microcosm, macrocosm. 13.7 billion years ago, there was a big bang. Nobody argues about that, okay, in the field. They argue about the dates, a couple of 100 million years between friends, but So if the universe was created, what do you think came first, energy or matter? We know they're both interconverted from Einstein, from E equals mc squared. The answer is energy came first by 500 million years. So if God in his infinite wisdom or whatever created the universe decides to create energy first, that only supports the concept that energy is more important. Yes, I do recommend you take care of your physical body, believe me. But the big picture here is that we're an energy-based soul, and that's much more important than the physical body, because eventually your body will fertilize the lawn. The energy of your soul, which is eternal and cannot be destroyed even by conventional physics, will eventually reincarnate and occupy a new body. So the energy is everything. It's also used in healing, as we'll see, and traveling into different dimensions and doing all of the fun stuff that's very spiritually growth-oriented. But it's all based on energy. So energy is everything with me. That's
wonderful. Could you tell us, before we go on a little bit further with you telling us more about that, in terms of your background, Dr. Bruce, how on earth did you come, first of all, to grow up with that interest originally in dentistry or science? And do you think, with having perhaps a scientific mind, you had at the time a little bit more of a left brain, as we would describe it, a little bit more of a left brain way of thinking? I don't know. What brought you to your original studies?
Well, my background is very unusual. In fact, my book, my updated version of the Past Lives, Future Lives book is called Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed. It gives a whole chapter on what I call my mission statement, and it gives you the details, but I'll give you a summary of it. When I was about 6 years old, I remember one of my teachers in grammar school, I was in in first grade, and he was asking people in the class, all the kids in the class, what do you want to be when you grow up? And most of the boys in the class would say, I want to be an astronaut, a cowboy, a policeman, president, whatever. And I said, I want to be a dentist. And I really don't know why when I was 6 years old, but that was always the thing in my back of my mind. I wanted to be a dentist. Okay. I had no interest in metaphysics at the time. When I was in high school and college, I was not into astrology or all the things that people were into the more New Age field. I was not against it. I just didn't really have the time because my background is I come from a very poor background. I'm a self-made man. So I had to work my way through school, and I just didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of things that my contemporaries did. So when I was in college, I majored in biology, minored in chemistry, biochemistry major. And then when I was in dental school in my sophomore year, I still did not have any great interest in the New Age field per se until I was dating a young woman who was a Leo, and I'm a Scorpio.
It's always a woman involved.
There's a woman. There's always a woman involved, okay? And she was. We were having some problems, and I wanted to know why. And one of my friends said, you ought to check out the astrological things. And she's a Leo, and I'm a Scorpio, which is a terrible combination. So I checked it out, and I said, this is kind of interesting. I took a little astrology course. This was in Baltimore, Maryland at the time, and it really kind of worked. Everything was fine. And then I ran across a very complicated story, but I ran across a book called The Search for Bridie Murphy, which was a documented case of reincarnation that occurred in the 1950s in Colorado. And I was interested in hypnosis for dental purposes, but at the same time I said, if I can do dentistry and, do hypnosis for pain control and apprehension, that's fine for the medical uses. But at the same time, I want to try this past life regression technique and see if it works. If it doesn't, I'll just do a dental thing. And if it does work, let's see what happens. Well, the very first patient I was working with was a woman who I didn't know that well. And I was just trying to experiment with the time travel technique of taking her to past lives. And she went into like 9 different lives. And I didn't know this at the time, but she had 2 habits and a phobia that I didn't even know about that resolved as a result of using the technique. So as a clinician, I said, wait a minute, whoa. I never had a lot of respect for therapy because I always found it to be a waste of time and people were just there forever and not getting anywhere. And then I think to myself, in a matter of a couple of weeks or maybe a month, this woman overcame 2 serious habits and a phobia. So then I started experimenting more with regression, doing more of it. She referred her friends to me, and I developed a practice with it. And then one fine day, a few years later, I asked the patient to go to the origin of her problem. I didn't say go back. I said go to. The subconscious mind is a really literal computer. This particular patient went into the 23rd century, and that was the beginning of progression hypnotherapy. And then I wrote my book, Past Lives, Future Lives, the original one, which was the first book ever written on documenting cases of future life progression, as I call it. So I went from there. Then I, of course, had things like out-of-body experiences, and we'll talk about that with different dimensions, which is a very nice way of healing. And then, of course, I had ET abductees came into my practice, so I started doing work with that. And then, of course, the big picture came more of a futuristic aspect when I actually ran across people who had these missing time experiences, and instead of being abducted by ETs from the current century, they were abducted by time travelers from our future, from the 30th to the 50th century. Most of those were the 30th to the 33rd century, and that was the beginning of the time travelers, or the chrononauts, as I call that, which I documented in the 2 books that you mentioned. So that gave me, you might say, a 360-degree turn here to my practice, going from simple past life regression, simple techniques of regression, all the way to out-of-body experiences, teleportation's involved, and we'll discuss that, all the way to time travelers from our future. So what I'd like to do is, just for your audience, we're going to be talking about a lot of cases, and I'm sure they're going to be very interesting because these are fascinating things. And the books, of course, are all very detailed about, there are techniques in there as well as case histories, as well as theory and a whole bunch of other stuff. But my latest book is called Exploring the Fifth Dimension. And this book deals with 3 phases. One is out-of-body experiences, the other is teleportation, and the other is parallel universes.
Okay, Bruce,
So,
before we continue, we know obviously about dimensions. Could you basically break down for our listeners, for our audience, just what dimensions consist of?
Okay. Let me just complete the thought. We'll do it. Just give me about 30 seconds here. So what I would like to offer for your audience, that if they order my book directly from my site, not from any bookstore, they will get a free CD called The Fifth Dimensional Travel, which will guide them into the different dimensions, which I'm going to summarize right now. So if they want to actually experience it rather than just read about it, if they order the CD directly from my site, I'll do that. Now let's discuss the actual dimensions. There are technically an infinite number of dimensions, but to keep it simple, we live in what we call the physical plane, or the earth plane. This is the plane of three dimensions. It's the illusion of reality, the plane of space, time, and matter and energy as we know it. Each dimension has a sound which is characteristic of that dimension. In this dimension, our physical plane, the sound of thunder is the classic sound. So when you're trying to leave the body, you don't want to do it during a thunderstorm because it's like you're a salmon swimming upstream, because the sound of this dimension is thunder, and you're trying to leave this dimension, and it's pretty much going to be very difficult, okay, almost impossible. The next dimension is the one that most people know about. This is called the astral plane. This was named during the Middle Ages. Astral means starry. The astral plane is the plane that is a very large dimension. It's the second largest dimension, and it's composed of two different subsets. One is called the lower astral plane, which is the dimension that people actually get psychically attacked from, and they go to a place they think is kind of hell because it's very negative, filled with a lot of weird entities. And then there's the upper astral plane, which is very, very positive, and this is a dimension where you can actually meet with your higher self or spirit guides or angels or even time travelers, or the more positive ETs like the Pleiadians and Arcturians, etc. And so the astral plane is divided into those two divisions. The characteristic sound of the astral plane is a roar of the sea, almost like listening to a seashell. Okay, the buildings are very large. They're all cathedral-like, and there is a museum there in the astral plane, the upper astral, where you can actually perceive inventions and technology of the future. And this is where people, I myself have been there. That's where I developed progression therapy. Bill Gates goes there. Einstein went there. Edison, everybody goes there who is a futurist or inventor or somebody who wants to deal with future technology. Beyond the astral plane is a very small plane, the smallest one, called the causal plane, which is the characteristic sound is the tinkling of bells, almost like a New Age bookstore. And what's relevant about the causal plane is that the Akashic records are stored here. These are fifth-dimensional electromagnetic computer cards which actually have a memory of all of our past, present, future, and parallel lives. Okay, so the causal plane is the one where psychics read, where people go to find information about past, future, etc. Beyond the causal plane is a very significant dimension called the mental plane. This is characterized by the sound of running water, but another sound that you'll hear there is the Om sound that the East Indians, for example, would use for meditation, developing mantras, etc. This is the dimension of the source of moral teachings, ethics, and philosophy. It's the home of the masters of various religions, the Jesuses, the Moses, the Buddhists, etc. would hang out there. And all the entities there, they're really kind of cool. They are like angel-like citizens. They wear white smocks. The houses are more abstract designs, and the highways, and they do have highways there, they're very deep, like an iridescent blue in color. So if you're traveling along a dimension, you don't know where you are, you see blue highways, you know it's the mental plane. The dimension beyond that is also a very significant one. It's the largest dimension. It's called the etheric plane. And the etheric plane is characterized by the sound of buzzing bees. You can look up at the sky 24 hours a day and see stars. And what's important about this dimension is that there are certain entities we call etheric plane surgeons there. If you have an illness that's incurable, like cancer, AIDS, or lupus, or one of these things that is going to cause your early death, you can actually go to the etheric plane and you travel to a different dimension in your spiritual body. So you would go to the etheric plane in your etheric body. And your etheric body is the only spiritual body that is identical to the physical body. And if these etheric plane surgeons operate on your etheric body, when you return to the physical plane, when you wake up the following morning, for example, because all dreams are out-of-body experiences, then you can actually transfer the healing from the etheric body to the physical body, and that's how you can cure incurable diseases. And I've done that. People give me credit for this, but of course their higher self or their etheric plane surgeons are the ones that are doing that. So the etheric plane is a very, very significant one for healing. Now beyond that, there's one more dimension, number 6 we call that, and that's the soul plane. Now the soul plane is characterized by the single note of a flute. And the entities there, the permanent residents there, they're like floating heads, so it's a very strange dimension. But this is the dimension that's not part of the higher planes, nor is it part of the karmic cycle. The etheric, mental, causal, astral, and physical plane make up our karmic cycle. This is where you reincarnate until you perfect the soul. But the soul plane is like a DMZ. It's a dimension that you actually go to after you cross into spirit or clinically die from any of these dimensions. And it's also the dimension that you will eventually ascend from when you perfect the soul. So it's a very critical dimension as far as leaving the karmic cycle and returning to what we call the God energy complex. Beyond the soul plane, there are 7 other dimensions. These are what we call the higher planes. You have to be perfect to be there. So no one's going to get there until they perfect the soul and eliminate the karmic cycle. The sound that we get from the higher planes is called indescribable orchestra-like music, okay? And in those dimensions, there's no cause and effect, there's no perpetrator, there's no victim. You might say it's heaven or nirvana, characterized by what we call the 13th plane in my paradigm, which is the God or nameless plane, which is where the God energy complex resides. And that, of course, what we call the 7th to the 13th plane and the higher planes is what people would call the true heaven or nirvana. So those are the different dimensions that characterize what we call our universe, our multi-universe mentality. And by traveling to them, it's a very spiritual experience because what you're doing there is you're learning how to do something that you're going to do anyway. When a person clinically dies from the physical plane, the next step is an out-of-body experience. They're going to go into the 5th dimension, occupying their astral body. Unfortunately, just about everybody goes to the lower astral for a while because they die in fear, thanks to society's brainwashing, religion, and government, and whatever. And then they go to the upper astral and eventually to the soul plane when they're going to choose their next life. So going through out-of-body experiences now while you're alive not only is it very spiritual because you can meet with your higher self, spirit guides, angelic entities, time travelers from our future, chrononauts as we call them, but you can also learn the technique of what's going to be eventually a technique you're going to have to do anyway when you cross into spirit. And the quicker you learn that, the quicker you can eliminate fear, which is the only, and I repeat, the only thing that keeps us in the karmic cycle is fear. If you overcome fear, then you can perfect the soul, and then you can eliminate the need to reincarnate. Therefore, you can either rejoin the God energy complex, or you can be like a Buddha and be like a spirit guide and help other people who haven't attained the perfection.
I'm interested that you said that about breaking the cycle of karma. I'm one of these people personally that believes that that can be done because there are other people or other communications that have talked similarly that it's only through fear which is such intrinsically kind of impressed upon us in this experience that does keep us repeating and recycling our souls.
The universe is not here for our titillation, nor is it here to torture us. The universe says, look, we've got universal laws, like the law of karma is what we just talked about. Another important law is, you have the law of attraction. The energy you send out is what you get. So people who are negative and cynical or people who are unethical, their lives are always miserable because that's what they attract into their life.
Well, that's also reflected in their subtle body energy, isn't it? Their thinking at that moment is emitting a frequency which is going to automatically attract. That's very true.
Remember what I said, energy is everything. That's the number one thing that I care about. So the subtle body or the astral body or the soul's energy, let's define what the soul is. Our soul, which, by the way, is supported by science today. You've got Rupert Sheldrake in England. You've got William Tiller at Stanford University. You've got people all around the world documenting the energy aspect of our awareness. The soul or subconscious mind, as it would be called clinically, is nothing but electromagnetic radiation, which is equivalent to a TV or radio signal, okay? And most of the radiation in the universe is electromagnetic. It's harmless radiation. But our soul is this form of radiation temporarily occupying your body until the body dies, and then it goes into a very complicated cycle, as we just described. Now, the soul's energy, the problem with the soul's energy is that it's compromised. And in addition to having a soul or subconscious mind, we also, each of us have separately, everyone's a different one, we have a higher self, which is you might say an agent of the God energy complex. It's made up of perfect energy, and it's our advisor. Eventually, when you overcome fear and perfect the soul, you merge with your higher self, and then, of course, you don't have to reincarnate. So the higher self connection, which is what I call my superconscious mind tap, is the main technique I use for healing and in any aspect of therapy, because what you want to do is you always want to maintain a connection with your higher self. Now, remember, your higher self is not just going to take over the body or take over your soul and just say, okay, let's get out of here and perfect ourselves and get out of here. It can do that anytime it wants, but we have to earn that. So the universe is here with very strict universal laws that says, just like anything else, you have to earn your way. Think of going to school. If you're going to college or you're taking prerequisite courses to get your degree, you don't just take one course and graduate. You got to go through 4 years or whatever to go through a very comprehensive program. And the same thing applies to our karmic cycle. Our higher self is here to help us, but we can ignore it. And it's not going to help us if we ignore it. And unfortunately, most people ignore it, which is why most people repeat errors over and over again, not only in this life, but in carryover from past lives. See, I have a philosophy about growth, just forgetting about hypnosis for a moment. Mm-hmm. There's 2 rules I use in life. One, always learn from other people's mistakes, okay? Yeah. In other words, don't make all your own. If you see somebody do something stupid, then don't do it. And secondly, never, ever, ever make the same mistake twice. And if you follow those rules, you're going to have a much healthier life and much more shorter, shall we say, karmic cycle. So the energy aspect is everything. When traveling through the dimensions, see, this is not unnatural. There's all kinds of courses about, and tapes and things and workshops about going out of the body. We go out of the body every single night for 3 hours a night. This is documented by universities here, UCLA in America and others. When you go into a sleep cycle, let's say you sleep for 7 to 8 hours a night, which is what the average person does as an adult. Well, during that cycle, it's a very complex 5-stage cycle. The stage 5 is called the REM cycle. This is the dream cycle, and dream laboratories have been documenting this for 60 years. And there's really no argument in the field about that. So what happens during this REM cycle, now we have some new research that shows that when you're dreaming in the REM cycle, it's an alpha brainwave. The alpha level is the level of hypnosis or meditation or yoga or biofeedback. These are all alpha techniques. Well, when you're dreaming for those 3 hours a night, broken up into 4 or 5 sleep cycles, depending on how long you sleep, you are literally out of the body, and there is experiments to show that. So every night we go out of the body. The question is, where do we go? Most people, because they're untrained and because they're very negatively programmed by society, which has always been negative, will go to the lower astral plane and will be attacked psychically by Darth Vader or Dick Cheney or lower astral entities for 3 hours, okay? And then they wake up the following morning, they return to the physical body, and of course they're going to be more burnt out and more harassed and more anxious and more cynical and more depressed. If you go to the upper astral, you don't have that problem. Think of, let me show you an example let me give you an indirect support for this. Think of a 4-year-old child. Now, in America, a 4-year-old child, unless he's from a very wealthy family where they put you into, pre-Harvard at age 2, forget that for a moment. The average kid doesn't do that. A 4-year-old child is, before he goes to first grade, before kindergarten. So what does a 4-year-old child in America do? He gets spoiled by his grandparents. He plays with his pets. He can sleep late. He eats a million meals a day. Okay, he can do whatever he wants. He goes to Disneyland or whatever. He's got no responsibilities, and most 4-year-old kids are pretty happy. Unless the parents are really freaks, the kids are usually pretty happy. It's a great time in their life. Now he goes to first grade. He's 6 years old. So what happens? He's got to wear tight shoes, can't play baseball because he's got to go to school, learn the alphabet, etc. And now the kids will pick on him because kids will always pick on you if you're different, right? Mm-hmm. And then he goes to school, and he goes to junior high school, which is the most vicious part of the kid's development because puberty and kids are really cruel like you wouldn't believe. And then he goes to high school, which is socially isolated. In other words, as the kid gets older, goes to college, and he goes through that mentality. Then he goes to work, and he learns how to get rejected by employers and used by the system, and he goes through life, and as he gets older, he gets more cynical, more miserable, instead of growing spiritually because he doesn't have the connection with the higher self. He or she does not maintain that spiritual connection. We should actually get more spiritual every day. If you spent your time on the upper astral plane with the higher self, you'd be walking along like, hey, man, this is fantastic. But most people I know look upon life as another day deeper in debt, very cynical, very depressed, very burnt out, and that is not the system.
No,
that is our right to do that, but the system is set up, universal laws, as we call it, where if you follow the rules correctly, access your higher self, go on the upper astral, not the lower astral, you're going to have beautiful experiences, you're going to grow spiritually, and your life is going to be a lot better, and that's what I train people to do.
So is there anything that we can do before we go to bed, maybe not watch something scary or something? Is there anything
yes, okay, that's a very good question.
Prep ourselves before we go into that sleep?
Neil, it's a very good question, and here's a very important rule of thumb. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, to a degree it does, but it doesn't really matter much what you do during the day. You're going to do what you have to do. If you work at some brain-dead, stressful job or have arguments with your siblings, family, whatever, okay, that's going to happen. All right, what you want to do, though, what's critical, though, is a half an hour before going to bed, you never want to do anything negative. Don't even think of watching the news, radio, TV. Don't look at the Internet. Don't look at your little thing about brain-dead news items that mean nothing because you're going to forget about them the next day and you can't control them anyway.
Oh, we love what you're saying.
What you want to do is you could read poetry, you could read something philosophical if you want, but this is what I recommend. Before going to bed, you want to do a natural alpha exercise. If you do yoga, fine. If you do meditation, fine. If you do hypnosis, even better. I've got CDs that run about 20 minutes or so on my site. There's about 150 of them they can check out. Anything that's positive and spiritual. In other words, if you're going to have a difficulty with your mate or whatever, do that before early in the evening. Don't do it a half an hour before going to bed. Because if you do that, the soul leaves the body through a chakra. We got 7 major chakras. I'm sure your audience is familiar with that. And if you have a negative experience within that 30 minutes, you're going to leave through most likely the 3rd chakra, which is the solar plexus or belly button area. The only place you can go to is the lower astral plane. Not a good concept. If you leave through the heart chakra, which is the 4th, or the throat chakra, the 5th, the 3rd eye, which is the 6th, the best one to leave at is the crown chakra, just above the crown of the head. This is the 7th chakra. This is where the higher self meets the soul. If you leave through any of those 4 what we call higher chakras, the only place you can go to is the upper astral plane or the other dimensions I mentioned, all of which are positive. The only negative dimensions in the universe is the lower astral plane and this one. All the others are positive. And all the others you can access your higher self very easily. So my point is, if you do 30 minutes before going to bed, if you do something positive, spiritual, just get rid of all the junk before then that's the answer to your question. That's how you can facilitate spending most of your evenings. So you're always going to spend time in the lower astral. Everybody's human. Even I go there once in a while. But the point is, most of your evenings, if you spend them, your dream levels at night is what I'm referring to, on the upper astral, you're going to win big time. You're going to grow spiritually, and you're not going to let things bother you. In fact, here's an example. Law of attraction is very important. When you do this on a regular basis, and I've been doing this for these techniques for like nearly 40 years now, I find that people in the world that I would consider to be energy vampires, weasels, idiots, jerks, they don't seem to come up to me. I very rarely have an incident where somebody I have to say, you know something, you're a jerk. Very rarely. Why? Because I send the energy out that says, don't even think about it.
Well, you are known as Dr. Positive, aren't you?
Well, I'm also Dr. Psychically Empowered. That's the term that I like to use I describe to. That's what I try to train people to do. So my point is that what I don't believe, and here's an example. We live in a world now, and this is no shock to you guys. We live in a world that's getting way too darn politically correct. Now, political correctness to me is an evil. What it represents is fear, number one, and just walking through life on eggshells. You don't win that game, all right? My attitude is if somebody does something stupid, I sit down and look at him and say, this is stupid. Don't do it again, okay? Don't even think of doing it with me or to me. And don't do it to anyone else either. You see, now, if you do that to somebody, they're going to say, ooh, that's terrible. No, it isn't, because if you don't do that, you're now sending out victimization energy. And guess what? The universe, via the law of attraction, is going to give you more things. Here's an example. I was doing a workshop. There was about 200 people, 80% of which were women, in a big conference room. Okay, so I asked them to raise their hand if this statement is true. Okay, and I said, here's the statement. Look at your past relationships. These were women that between 30 and 50, so they had relationships. None of them were virgins. Okay. All right. So hopefully, anyway. So anyway, I said to them, look at your relationships. Whether you're married now, I don't really care. But look at your relationships since you were a teenager, whenever you started dating. And isn't it true? And if it is, raise your hand, that you've met the same person, maybe in different bodies, and maybe they look differently. But if you dated the guy who beat you up, the guy who cheated on you, the gambler, the drug addict, the weasel, the con artist, whatever it was, or the very cool guy, if you dated that same person just represented by different bodies, raise your hand. All the 180 women, all their hands went up. Okay? The reason being is because they're sending out the energy that if they allow themselves to be victimized by attracting a drug addict, a gambler, a cheater, a wife beater, whatever, into their life, that's who they're going to meet over and over again until they change their energy. And this is what happens. This is why you can predict human nature so well. You know, governments, corporations, and religion that make up our society, those are bureaucracies that none of them are on your side. They will all lie and cheat and weasel and give you politically correct statements and try to schmooze you and be hypocritical, as they all are. But they don't care about you. What they care about is themselves, power and money. That's what they care about.
They're psychopaths, aren't they? They literally are psychopaths.
Well, they're also energy vampires, too,
Yeah.
if you allow that. But here's the point. So, look, I live in society. I just don't care about those bureaucracies. I don't let them bother me. If I want to speed on the freeway, I speed. I don't care about legislative laws, and I don't care about religious laws. But I do care about, because they're all plagiarizing the big one, universal laws. The universe has laws which are created by perfect beings. Religious laws and secular laws or legislative laws are created by people trying to control people, you see? So my point is that be empowered. Never have fear. Don't worry about things. Oh, you're not going to win everything. I mean, sometimes, they say, defecation happens, okay? But that's a minority of situations. But if you send out the energy that, oh, my goodness, I'm going to be screwed by this or I'm going to get whatever, then you're going to have that into your life. So my point is you can use these principles, and don't forget the dimensions, because our higher self, our spirit guides, live in the fifth dimension. We live in the fifth dimension, too. The problem is our physical eyes and other senses are only designed for 3 dimensions. So we can't see into the fifth dimension unless we enter into what we call an altered state of consciousness, like hypnosis, meditation, yoga, etc. That will put you into a level, a natural level, which will allow you to perceive using your astral senses or other spiritual bodies to perceive the different dimensions. So this is the example of how that works. So going through out-of-body experience is part of spiritual training. Now, out-of-body experiences mean that the soul is leaving the physical body, traveling through a spiritual body, astral, causal, mental, etheric, or soul plane, and going to that appropriate or respective dimension. Now, what I think is more interesting is not just the out-of-body experience. That's fine. Out-of-body experience has been around forever. Okay, but how about this? And I think this is something your audience wants to know about. How about the T word for teleportation? Now, teleportation is defined as the actual physical movement of the physical body from one place to another without walking, without using any vehicle. In other words, forgetting about Star Trek with Beam Me Up Scotty, I understand those references, but you actually move from one place to another, which supposedly is impossible, but in fact has been reported throughout history. In fact, the most common, the countries or the areas of the world that have the most reported cases are England and Argentina, interestingly enough, teleportation. But here's an example. So teleportation is the physical body moves. Now I want to give you the most documented example of teleportation ever recorded in history. And there's a lot of cases that are documented, but this one's the biggie. This occurred in October 24th, 1593. A Spanish soldier appeared on the plaza in front of the palace in Mexico City. Now, you have to understand, 500 years ago almost, Spain owned the Philippines, okay? And they owned Mexico. They were colonies, right? So a Spanish soldier appeared. Now, in Mexico, the uniform and the guns were very different than they were on the continent, namely Spain, or in its direct possessions like the Philippines. You'll see why the Philippines is relevant. This Spanish soldier, his name was Gil Perez, by the way, he's standing in front of the palace in Mexico City, and of course he's immediately arrested. They say, "What are you doing here? Who are you? You're not one of us because of your gun and your uniform." And he said, "Well, I'm from Manila, and I'm very embarrassed because I tried very hard to do my job, but the governor was murdered." And they said, "The governor? The governor's right here." They said, "No, the governor of Manila. This is the one Don Gomez Perez das Moranas." And they said, "The governor of Manila was murdered, you say, like a few hours ago, and you're 9,000 miles away from Manila? You're a loco." So they put him in jail. And they interrogated him, and then they brought the priest from the local priest there because they thought, exorcism time, because this is the 5th, 16th century, right? Okay, so then what happened was that they put him in jail, and they just keep him there for 2 months. Now, 2 months later, a ship comes from Manila. Now, remember, Spain owned these territories, so these colonies. So it takes about 2 months to go from Manila to Mexico City. They go all the way around. So what happens is now it's Christmas time in 1593, and now the ship comes in. Of course, they bring the news as well as the supplies, and they're doing the check to make sure everything is cool. They haven't rebelled and gotten their independence yet. So the guy comes in and he says, "Oh, by the way, I bring you some news from Manila." And they said, "What's that?" And he said, "The governor was murdered." And they said, really? When was that? He was murdered on October 24th. And they said, really? We want you to come into our jail for a moment. We got somebody we want you to talk to. So the guy goes to the jail. He says, that's Gil Perez. He was one of the guards. And they said, you are acknowledging that this guy was on duty on October 24th when the governor was murdered? They said, yes. And they eventually released Gil Perez, and he went back to Manila. Now, here's the thing. The historians documented it because of, obviously, the jail and the police, etc. The Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, documented because of the priest and the exorcism. So now we have a guy who, the only way you go from, he actually teleported backwards in time. On the morning of October, forward in time, on the morning of October 25th was the day after October 24th when the governor was murdered. So he actually teleported, went forward in time by about 12 hours. The only way you get from Manila, Philippines to Mexico City, 9,000 miles away in 1593, is by teleportation. There were no jets. So here's the example of a documentation by two major authorities, the government and, of course, the church involved. So that's Gil Perez and his trip into Neverland. That was actually fully documented.
Bruce, do we know what caused something like that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Shock,
I mean,
trauma?
You've talked in the past about rips in time slips. Is it?
Right.
Are we going down that route?
Neil, you're very profound. You got the answer. The answer is
it's grinning.
you get a bonus point. In fact, for that, I'm not going to send you into the lower ashole after this interview. The answer is we have what's called tears in time. Now, this is going to relate. I'm going to give a little segue to something we'll discuss in a few minutes about time travelers. Time travel, just quickly, will be discovered in approximately the year 3050 by a man named Tatos. And what they do is they have a device called the Wormhole Linear Accelerator. It's WLA is what they call it. And what this does, it enlarges a wormhole to a size large enough, normally they're microscopic, so that a craft can go in there with a team of chrononauts or time travelers and go back in time. And by the way, the model for this was set up, we know that by Kip Thorne, the astrophysicist from Caltech, who, by the way, was the guy who out-debated Stephen Hawking on the existence of black holes several years ago. So Kip Thorne is a pretty bright dude. Anyway, he gave the mathematical, I know, this is America versus Britain, okay, but it's not 1776, okay, we won't go there. So what happened was that... although George Washington is overlooking this interview right now. What happened was that Kip Thorne gave the mathematical model in a scientific article in the Physical Review Letters, which is a very technical physics journal, in September of 1988. And he did that as a favor to his good friend Carl Sagan, who was writing the novel who wrote his magical novel that he wanted to have scientific documentation for to make it accurate technically. And Kip Thorne wrote the article, which was 25 years ago, and nobody has successfully challenged it yet. So we know the model of time travel. We just can't do it because we don't have certain elements. But be that as it may, when you go back in time through enlarging wormholes, you create tears in the fabric of space-time. This is very important. And when you do that, that's why there are cases where fish fall from the sky, that shouldn't do that, or you have people teleporting from one place to another because of these. You're entering into a tear in the fabric of space-time. That is the origin or the mechanism of explaining teleportation. By the way, the novel was called Contact. It was made into a movie with Jodie Foster.
That's right, yeah.
Your listeners who are in. But Kip Thorne was the one who gave the scientific efficacy for that. Now, here's another case of entering into a tear of the fabric. By the way, they call this time slips, too, where people all of a sudden wind up 30 years in the past or 20 years in the future by entering what we call these time slips. Another very famous one occurred in 1901 in Paris. There were two women, by the way, from England. These were English women who drank tea at 4 o'clock, okay?
Like we all do over here.
Yes, of course, terribly. We do that every day here.
Okay, in August of 1901, one Anne Moberly, who was the principal of St. Hugh's College in Oxford, and a Dr. Elena Francis Jordan, they visited Paris on a holiday, okay, August, nobody works in August, in Europe, right? And they went to the Petit Trianon. Now, the Petit Trianon was a little area, a little device, or a little building that was given by Louis the 16th to Marie Antoinette. And so they wanted to visit that, and they were trying to see where it was, and they're wandering around the grounds, and they see these two men dressed with grayish-green coats wearing small three-cornered hats. Now, that wasn't the style in 1901, right? So they think it's kind of odd, but they thought maybe it's like an event going on, they're going back in time and just trying to, like a Renaissance festival kind of thing. So they didn't take it too seriously. They directed them to the Petit Trianon, and while they were there, they saw a woman wearing a sundress with a big hat, painting, like doing a little etching painting on the front lawn there, and they recognized her as Marie Antoinette. And they said, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? They also heard some exotic music, some very interesting music. And they were both musically inclined, so they jotted down the music that they heard. Okay, well, they thought this was all very odd, and a few, maybe 20 minutes later or so, they felt disoriented, and they wound up back at the Petit Trianon, or the area where they left, in 1901. Now, here's the key. They were trying to describe this to people, and everybody thought they were crazy. And what happened was that further research, and they documented this in a book that they wrote that was published in 1910, which, of course, people thought was very weird and strange and unusual. It was called The Adventure. Okay, now here's what happened. In November 2nd, 1789, Marie Antoinette had been sitting in the Petit Trianon when she first learned that a mob from Paris was marching toward the palace gates, French Revolution time. Okay, and so she was celebrating her 34th birthday at the time. All right, now what happened was that people just said, okay, that's all fine, but this isn't documented. This is just, these women were just whatever. They were just having an out-of-body experience, or they were just drunk, or whatever. Now what happened was that they eventually found recently, about 15 years ago, okay, long after this case was documented, they found a journal from some of the maids or the servants in the Petit Trianon from that time. And the servants wrote down that one fine day, we found two unusual women who came across the Petit Trianon dressed in very unusual clothes, right? Those were Anne and Eleanor. And then the music that these two women documented were all poo-pooed by the experts. They all said, that music didn't exist. I don't know where you're getting that from. We never heard of that music. The music that was played on Marie Antoinette's 34th birthday at that day at the Petit Trianon was documented and kept with the journal of these ladies, and these women reported the correct music. So now we have a fully documented case of these two women entering into a time slip, tearing the fabric of space-time, going from 1901 back to 1789. And by the way, in August of 1901, as further research showed, there were a lot of electrical storms throughout Europe that year. Electrical storms can also facilitate teleportation because they can facilitate the tears in the fabric of space-time, creating an opening and, in fact, allowing people to go back in time. So here's another example of a very documented case of teleportation.
Dr. Bruce, let's move it on a little bit, but stay with the time slips and get into the alien abductions. I've heard you talk before about the fact that the Greys have used this sort of time slip technology.
Right. Now, the Greys are the Pleiadians are the good aliens, are the good ETs. Pleiadians are actually, they're about 5 feet tall, they're blonde hair, blue eyes, they look kind of like us. And the Pleiadians are also known as gatekeepers. They're the ones that actually can go through these wormholes and actually go back and forward through time. Now, the Greys and the Reptilians, those are the nasty ones, of course. They're the ones that can do this too, as well as other ETs. So in other words, people always say, look, Zeta Reticuli, which is the home of the Greys, is 25 light years away. It would take 25 years to traveling the speed of light to come here. It's ridiculous. That's true, except there is something called the Alcubierre warp drive, which is a very documented mathematical model to show how an entity, a human being or an ET or whatever, can actually slingshot their way through the universe by entering into these wormholes and therefore going from one end of the universe to the other without worrying about the speed of light and all the Einsteinian stuff. So going through, not only can they go through one end of the universe to the other quickly, so 25 light years, instead of being 25 light years, it might take them a couple of weeks to go from one end, Zeta Reticuli, to here, but they can also travel into parallel universes because we have more than one universe. Back in 1957 in Princeton University, a man by the name of Hugh Everett III was working on his doctoral dissertation in quantum mechanics, which is also called quantum physics to the lay public, and his many worlds phenomena was the first documentation, mathematically, of parallel universes. That's been argued for the last 56 years, and nobody's disproven it. Parallel universes are a given today. They're accepted. So my research has shown that you can actually travel. I developed a technique called the new you technique, where people can actually travel into a parallel universe. In other words, let's say one of your listeners, their life is miserable. They've got deformities, a criminal record, a drug addiction, they're bankrupt. Their life is in the toilet. And their attitude is that, what do I do? I can't live. This is ridiculous. A lot of people contemplate suicide for that, which I never recommend, of course. Well, what we can do is we can use hypnosis and a technique I developed called the paragression, which is going into parallel universe. Regression is back in time. Progression is forward in time. And with paragression, you can take the person into their parallel universe, as I call these frequencies. And there's 5 major ones, even though there's an infinite number if you add them all up. And you can have them perceive their ideal frequency. So let's say they're in frequency 1 now, which is lousy. And let's say they perceive frequency 4, which is their ideal path. Okay? Well, I can train them to switch tracks. Their soul, their subconscious mind, can go from one frequency to the other, and they could wake up one morning in the not-too-distant future and be on frequency 4, where everything they describe now is irrelevant. Now, the frequency that they left doesn't disappear into a black hole. It goes on. They're just not aware of it because everybody's ideal frequency is different. Let's say 1 through 5. Yours may be 5. Mine may be 3. Somebody else may be 2. The point is you can switch tracks. And I use this technique myself in the sense that back about 20-some-odd years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine to he's a writer. He wanted to do a movie for television. And one of my cases eventually became A Search for Grace. And he was authorized by CBS to do the treatments, but they wouldn't air it. There were problems. There were all kinds of internal problems and all kinds of things I had nothing to do with, but, I have to deal with it. And he called me up in a panic and said, Bruce, the movie's not going to air. CBS isn't going to do it. And I said, let me handle it. And he said, well, they don't want to hear from you. And I said, I'm going to use one of my techniques. And he says, oh, you're going to go weird on me, right? And I said, look, you got nothing to lose, okay? Just go out there and do your thing, okay? So I used my new you technique, and I went to the different parallel universes, and I saw one. There were a couple of them, but I saw one which was not only would the movie air, but there were several other things over the next 10 to 15 years, which I had no control over. These are events, these are people, these are companies, these are all kinds of things going on that would be relevant to my life had I chose that particular frequency. So I decided that, it's time for a change, okay? So I switched tracks, and sure enough, about 2 weeks later, I get a call from the same writer, and he said, you got a meeting at CBS next Friday, pre-production. They're going to do the movie. And I said, yeah, I knew that. He said, how did you know that? I said, never mind. So basically what happened is the movie aired May 17th, 1994. The movie aired, Search for Grace. It's there. And several other things over the next 10 to 12 years also occurred, which, again, I had no control over, and therefore I switched tracks. Now, what happened to the universe in which I left? Well, I'm there. I'm doing my thing. The movie didn't air, less publicity. My writer friend didn't get paid as much money because it didn't air. And other things happened, too. And it was a good universe, but it wasn't my ideal one or my best one, so to speak. So my point is I can do it. Anyone can do it. It's not that complicated. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't. And the universe gives it to us not to titillate us, but as a way of saying, let's show you how you can overcome fear and to empower yourself, because the other choices are not good. Either learn to live in misery or commit suicide. None of those are particularly desirable or recommended. So my point is, again, using the universe's laws and its beautiful, brilliant experience and establishment and foundation, if you cooperate with the universe will cooperate with you. So parallel universes are interesting. But here's another case that I think is, I want to go with one more teleportation case to show you how you can actually save a life. Now, I don't take credit for this. I was training this woman to do out-of-body experiences and teleportation. She lives in Los Angeles. And she was dating a real jerk. This guy was beating her up. He was verbally abusive. And I was trying to, say, don't you want to, get rid of this guy and go on with your life and meet a soulmate? And she said, yeah, but I don't know what to do. I've been dating this guy, and I'm not that attractive, and guys don't hit on me a lot, and this and that. So I said, okay, let's work on this. Now, one fine day, she's on the freeway with her jerky boyfriend, and they're having an argument, which was very typical, and they're traveling about 70 or 75 miles an hour. He gets very angry with her, pushes the unlock you can control your locks on the driver's side, unlocks the passenger side, kicks the door open, and throws her out into the freeway at 70 miles an hour. Okay? She twists her ankle, and now she can't even run. Okay? There's a car coming in the opposite direction, about to hit her. The only thing she remembered was a post-hypnotic instruction that I gave her in reference to out-of-body experiences and teleportation. So she did that, and the next thing she knows, she winds up on her couch in her apartment with a very sore ankle. Now, what happened on the freeway now was that the boyfriend realized he did something really stupid. The guy coming at her, who about to hit her, all of a sudden, he went through nothing but air. In other words, he saw her there, figured he's going to hit her, screeched on the brakes, but the momentum of the car carried him through where he would have killed her. Well, of course, he wasn't there. So people didn't know what's going on, and this and that. So this woman actually teleported from the freeway back to her apartment and is alive today. Thank goodness the end of the story is, of course, she was able to break up with her boyfriend and go on with her life and meet somebody else. And that was fun. But the point is that there is an example of a teleportation that not only was cool, but also literally saved her life. I didn't save her life. She and her higher self did. So that's an example of how you can use these techniques for positivity.
I told you it was going to be a fascinating show.
Wow.
We're talking to Dr. Bruce Goldberg. The website is on our Facebook page and on our website as well, but I'll give it you anyway. It's drbrucegoldberg.com. We've still got loads to ask you about, and we're running out of time. One of the things I wanted to mention and squeeze in is the whole time travel. And it's a fascinating subject, but a very highly complex subject. You've obviously had some great results from future life progression. What stand out for you as some of the exciting things that you've glimpsed of the future?
Well, the time travelers from our future, or chrononauts, is to me the most dynamic. I progressed, and this is in my Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed book. I give the case history of this gentleman. He actually went into the future. He wanted to explore to see what a future life was like. That was his only request. He didn't have any specific paradigm. He just wanted to see what the future was going to be like. Well, he goes into about 1,000 years into the future, and he actually will become a time traveler. Okay, and I document a case, a very dynamic case. But let me give you an example of something a little bit more relevant from the present to the future. I was working with this woman. I call her Wendy. She's documented in my Time Travels from Our Future book. And she had a lot of problems, depressed, overweight, just her whole life was falling apart. And what happened was she was being abducted by time travelers from like the 23rd century, and they would take her aboard a craft, okay? And they would take her into a conference room where the head time traveler, who would be a human, pure human, is about 6.5 feet tall, blonde hair, Caucasian, blue eyes, wearing a nice white like toga with a gold belt around him, a gold sash, okay? And she would be abducted in between the sessions she had with me. So she says, "Doctor, I don't know what to do here." And I said, "Well, tell me about the experience with this time travel." She goes, "Well, he's very positive, very spiritual. He shows me holograms of my past lives, all of which were negative, all of which he was like a real victimized woman, or man, and, nothing was very." But she said, something is really weird, though. When he shows me these holograms, because that's how they educate us, they show us holograms, is that he's getting very emotional. In other words, he's getting very sad as he sees how negative my past lives were. And I don't know why. So I said, "Look, I have a suggestion. Between now and your next session, you're going to be abducted again." I got that, okay? So why don't you just ask him? She goes, "I can't do that." I said, "Sure you can." All communication, by the way, is telepathy on the fifth dimension, or when you're dealing with time travelers, especially on their craft. So I said, just just use your mind and just simply say, "Why are you so emotional?" So she does that, and the time traveler looks at her, and of course telepathically says, "The reason I get so emotional in working with you is because you are my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother." Okay, they're allowed to work with their ancestors. And at the end of before he completed his work with her, he said, "Now look, I've got to tell you something. I'm going to tell you something very, very curt here, but I don't want you to obsess with this, but over the next couple of years, you're going to be meeting a man who's going to have red hair, and he's going to travel or drive a white Corvette. Okay? I just want you to take that relationship very seriously." And then that's it. Okay? Now she's returned back. No more abductions. I work with her. She gets over her issues. It's a great case, right? So that was the end of the case, I thought. Well, 18 months later, she calls me up, and she says, "Doctor, this is Wendy." And she goes, "I just want you to know that I am now engaged to be married to Frank is what she, these are not their real names, of course. Frank has red hair, drives a white Corvette, okay? And they got married, and over the next couple of years, they had a couple of children. One of these days, their kids are going to have kids, and their kids' kids are going to have kids, and one of them is going to be a time traveler. So here we have an example of progression, karmic family values.
What about anything positive for the future? I mean, how does the world look in, the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years? Are we going to get rid of these governments?
Okay. Well, we're always going to have governments, but the good news here is that the next, say, 50, 60 years, you're going to have the usual idiots doing things, computer crimes and phony politicians and the sex scandals and all the usual stuff to keep us, to keep the E network happy and TMZ and stuff. But when you get beyond the 21st century, things are going to get a lot more positive and a lot more spiritual. And by the 35th century, we're talking about the ideal century of both technological and spiritual development. So let me give you some examples of technology of the 35th century, okay? There's going to be an anti-gravity amusement park known as the Land of Tatos, dedicated to the man who discovered time travel. And this is a park that floats several thousand feet above the Earth, and there's a force field around it so people don't fall off the edge, because some people might do that, And the purpose of this park is not rides there like Disneyland. What you do is you can go back into any time period you want. You can go back to the Renaissance or ancient Rome, etc. That's why it's called the Land of Tatos. So the anti-gravity amusement park is one example. Another one, which is really kind of fun, is called I call this the Mind Witch Machine. It's a food simulator that creates any meal you desire from your thoughts alone. So you could think of the proverbial chicken sandwich. You'll get it in this microwave, except it runs by thoughts, and you can eat as much as you want. You won't gain weight. It's very nutritious, and therefore nobody goes hungry in the future. Another device is called the Alpha Syncolarium, which is very popular, especially for women. This is a device that it looks like an isolation tank, and it sends energy signals to the body along with very unusual sounds. And what it does is the body is de-stressed, and our production of the hormone DHEA, which is the sex hormone, is increased significantly. Why is that important? Because that builds up our immune system, and it increases our lifespan. So in the 35th century, the average lifespan is between 500 and 900 years young. And people who are like 600 or 700 years old don't look a day over 450. They do it well. Then there's an information pill, which is actually developed by the 26th century. So when you get up in the morning, you take your little information pill. All the news that's fit to print or to swallow is imbibed, so you don't have to worry about listening to the media. You're aware of all current research. Everything is up to date. Every home will have a teleportation station. This is more for local transportation. So if you want to go across town, instead of minding the Gap in England, I've been there. You will teleport from one place to another. So you might say, mind the astral particles. Okay? Now there's also devices here where you have like a holographic relaxation center. This is almost like the holodeck on Star Trek, where if you want to chill out, you had a busy day, a rough day, you can create an environment, and it could be a time period if you want, where you can just, go back there and hunt dinosaurs if you want, to do whatever you want. And this is all based upon alpha techniques, so to speak. And then the holograph will disappear whenever you want to, and you go back to your life. There are also virtual reality techniques are applied so that you can make a very small apartment look like a warehouse, or vice versa, to store items, if you will. Objects can be shrunk in size for storage, or later enlarged back to the normal size. In the future, long before the 35th century, but definitely by the 35th, there'll be no psychosis, no drug problems. Everybody does what they want to do professionally. The average work week is about 15 to 20 hours, so you have plenty of time to do what you want to do. And the governments throughout the world become all democratic. You don't have to worry about fascism, communism, or any of these maniac, weird, freaky governments that are very, very anti-human rights. By the 24th and 25th century, you're going to have universal democracy throughout the world. And the government does not poke its nose into your business any more than necessary for national security.
I've got to ask you, Bruce, in all this futuristic stuff, are we still going to have Henry Kissinger with us.
Henry Kissinger shares a condo with Adolf Hitler on the lower astral plane. Okay.
There you go.
And they both speak medieval German. Okay.
Just fantastic. Because half of those things that you described in the future, I think Kissinger's already got access to them, along with his mate Dick Cheney, hasn't he? You know, I think that's
yes. Those are called interdimensional war crime people. Okay.
Absolutely.
But my point is that the thing is that what you hear about society and all these shows, about the future, they're always showing negative stuff. Fringe and the X-Files and all these movies they have. Everything is always some, no rights, no freedom, like Planet of the Apes. Where everything is where our rights and freedom are deteriorating. Well, that's fine for Hollywood, but Hollywood is only feeding into people's negativity and cynicism that they promote anyway.
That's a way to make things happen, isn't it? To put it into people's consciousness.
My point is, you can't ignore that, but you don't have to obsess with it. My philosophy in life is I always ignore news items. If something is really important, I'm going to hear about it, okay? But if you focus in on news items, 95% of them are negative. All you're going to do is be depressed or angry or cynical or all three, and you're not going to win that game. You're going to live in fear, and therefore you're going to get paranoid, and therefore you're going to have a long karmic cycle. So my point is to decrease the karmic cycle, not increase it.
And get rid of the TV.
Well, and the radio, except for certain shows. Okay.
Well said.
But my point here is to keep a positive mentality towards this, and to realize that you have control. Now, time travel. I'd like to spend just a few moments on the time travelers because I mentioned about the pure human. There are actually four different types of time travelers. The pure human is the one I mentioned. He's 6 to 7 feet tall, blonde, blue-eyed, tan, clean-shaven, always wearing white robes with like a golden sash, etc. Then there are the lowest levels of a time traveler team, which are the grays, interestingly enough. They're 3 to 5 feet tall. They're what I call the Steven Spielberg type of gray, large black eyes, grayish skin, no earlobes, no 4 fingers and toes. They are the ones that they also can be blue or white in color. These are the kindler and gentler types. These are the ones that are the gophers. They're the ones that get coffee for the pure human. Okay, so we would assume today that a gray would be more sophisticated, intellectually and technologically advanced, but not in the future. Then there are the hybrid time travelers, which are a mixture between the grays and the pure humans, and they are between 5.5 to 6 feet tall. Their skin ranges from whitish hues to a bronze color, and they look kind of quite human from a distance, but the closer you get to them, because of their large faceted eyes and their odd-looking forehead, the more you realize that you're not in Kansas anymore. and they're superior. They're superior to the grays. They're superior to the grays, but inferior to the pure humans. Now, those are the three main time travel teams from the early time travel teams from the first 300 to 400 years of time traveler.
What about the reptilians? Are they still in the mix in the future?
Well, no,
they've got to mention the reptiles.
Let me complete my thought. So those are the three are the good guys. Now, there are reptilians. Reptilians are always negative. In the future, reptilians are what we call criminals escaping from the government, and sometimes they will actually travel back in time. These futuristic reptilians are always fugitives. They are not Draco types, so they don't have wings as the current reptilians do, and they're always a problem. In fact, they're cannibalistic, so they tend to eat their mistakes, which is why you don't have a lot of documentation to reptilian interactions. Their color of their skin ranges from green to blue to gray to brown. They're 6 to 8 feet in height. They're weighing 250 pounds. They're cold-blooded, 3 fingers and opposing thumb. Some of them shape-shift to look human. Others will wear human-like suits, which they can peel off. But the point is, you always want to keep away from the reptilians. They are bad medicine. And now, here's another thing. You've got Stonehenge in England. You've got all these megaliths throughout Europe and the Easter Island that nobody can explain. The Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, the Giza Plateau. How did primitive man construct those? Well, the ETs, interestingly enough, were not very helpful. The only way they could have been constructed efficiently was by a device called the anti-gravity flying craft, which were owned by time travelers from our future. And in my Time Travels from My Future book, I document exactly what these things look like. These are cars that hover above 6 to 9 feet above the ground. They blow a constant stream of air down from the center, from its underside. And by the way, there's a figure, 2 figures showing what these look like in the Time Travelers book if people want to see what they look like. And they have a small circular anti-gravity generators that are used to move these very large, heavy stones to construct a pyramid or whatever megalith were involved. And these vehicles also had multi-dimensional properties that could alter the magnetic lines of force of the Giza Basin or wherever they were to lift these huge stones and to place them with intimate surgical accuracy. The movements of these crafts was by a continual pulse which could alter both the speed and altitude of this vehicle instantly. The vehicle had 8 circular lights, small lights on the underside so they could work at night, and there were 5 large ones on the side of the craft. And what's very interesting here was that there's always a triangular-shaped insignia on the hood of the craft. Now, that's important because a triangular-shaped insignia is always significant of a futuristic being. That's how they may have an eye in the center. They may have all kinds of things depending on where they're coming from, but the triangular shape is always a symbol of the future. So people say, how do I know if I'm meeting a gray or a person, a being wearing a nice white jumpsuit, could be a Pleiadian, how do I know they're from this century or from the future? Well, if they wear a triangular shaped insignia on their uniform, or their craft, you can pretty much tell that they know all the ends of all the TV series that we air today, Okay, so point is this: these are the time travelers. They're here for our spiritual growth, and the reason why they're so concerned about spiritual growth for us is because they're us in the future. So the more we screw up our universe, the worse it is for them in the future. So that's why these time travelers actually interact with us, and they do it during the dream level. When you go to sleep at night and dream, you're in the 5th dimension. Remember, your out-of-body experiences. They can interact with us and kind of give us, creative instincts, artists, musicians, writers. They can give scientific technology, Edison, Einstein, Tesla, you name it, A lot of our scientific discoveries, I did a research project years ago, and I found out that 80% of major scientific discoveries that we would call major discoveries were the people who made those discoveries did that because of the dreams that they have a night before. In other words, the dream levels gave them the material that, and Edison's a perfect example of that, by the way, if you know his history. He used to take naps in New Jersey with a bunch of metal balls, like the Mutiny on the Bounty kind of metal balls, in his hand, and there was a metal pan beneath him because he would fall asleep, have a brilliant dream, but then he'd forget it. So what he did was he had these metal balls in his hand, so when he would take a nap, the balls would be released by his hand, wake him up, then he would go to his drafting board, which is only a few feet away, his drafting table, and then he would, make up the Xerox machine, the camera, the light bulb, all the magical 1,100-plus patents that he did were done by using his REM cycle, which, in my humble opinion, was an example of actual time travelers communicating with him. The same thing with Einstein and Tesla and the others. All these people, Da Vinci, etc.
Is it similar with the likes of Edgar Cayce?
I was just about to ask about
He used to
Edgar
set
Cayce,
sort of homework, if you like, for his students that they could access in their dreams.
Cayce actually, of course, he worked with a hypnotist who put him into a somnambule hypnotherapy state, and Cayce would describe actually the superconscious mind. He would describe the higher self if you read the literature in detail. But yes, he was obviously accessing. Now, were time travelers involved? Maybe not. It could have been done purely by spirit guides and his higher self, but I suspect because Cayce reported the use of radiation treatment in cancer long before medicine did that. Cayce died in 1945, but he had these readings in the 20s and 30s, and medicine was not using radiation for cancer. So he came up with a lot of technological things in medicine, especially that were not done for decades after his life or after the time that he made these readings. So I would suspect that time travelers were involved. But Da Vinci is my favorite because if you ask any scholar about who is the greatest mind in history, it's Da Vinci. Nobody argues about that. Yeah. Leonardo da Vinci had the greatest human brain and mind in the history of mankind. Well, in the 16th century, when you're making tanks, when you're dealing with helicopters and parachutes and all kinds of devices, as well as his artwork, the most famous painting in the world, and I was in Paris this summer to see the Mona Lisa. It's a biggie. So this guy was a scientist. He was an artist. I mean, this guy was a philosopher. The guy was everything. He is the equivalent of Tatos was in the future, who developed time travel. Tatos was also a very well-experienced and multi-talented dude. So my point is, you say, well, why? People will argue with me and say, you know something, this is ridiculous. Well, let me tell you something. One of the greatest periods of history in the last 2,500 years was the golden age of Greece, when you had about 300, 400 BC, when you had Archimedes, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. These were great minds. Why didn't they develop cell phones? Why don't they have satellite TV? Okay? Why didn't they have Planet Xtra Greek version? Okay? Why? Because I think the time travelers weren't connecting with them, nor the ETs in those time areas. The raw materials on our planet haven't changed in 10,000 years. So what we do today could have been done 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. The Earth hasn't changed that much. We haven't had major cataclysms. We haven't had any pole shifts. We haven't had anything to prevent us from doing the technology today, except for two things that are different. One, ET contacts coming out of their kazoo, and every time there's a major ET contact, there's a major spike in technology. Roswell, 1947. Look what happened to the computer age. 1895, 96, in America, we had many ET observations, or UFOs, I should say. They weren't called UFOs in those days, but there were many of them reported in newspapers all around America. And what happened in 1903? Kitty Hawk, planes. Again, every time there's a major UFO thing, 1954, 1973, all the major UFO ET observations, abductions, etc., but mostly UFO sightings are always correlated with a spike in technology. And I think both ETs and time travelers are the reason why we're not sitting in caves with ooga, shucking up trees to get bananas or coconuts for our mate.
You've actually got an interesting statistic about contact, and we're actually in the most popular month for contacts, aren't we?
Right. July. Is actually the most popular month. The 24th of the month is the most popular day of the month, and 11 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night is the most common time statistically when people get abducted. So if it's July 24th, and if it happens to be a Wednesday, and it happens to be 11 o'clock, fool around with your mate. Don't go outside, okay?
I actually quite enjoy it. I think making contact with somebody. Nobody ever makes contact with me, so I think I quite enjoy it. Listen, we're coming to the end of the show. Tell us about what's new for you, what you're working on at the moment. Give us a repeat of the free CD offer as well.
For your listeners, what I'm working on is, of course, just for your listeners, I do speaking engagements. So if any of your listeners out there want to hire me to do any kinds of workshops on my site, there's about 13 or 14 different topics I deal with, from everything from abductions, time travel, time travelers, regression, progression, etc. I'm also working on 2 television projects here. One of them will be hopefully co-hosting a cable TV series about unusual phenomena. And again, for your listeners also, I'd like to repeat the offer that I made earlier. If they order my Exploring the Fifth Dimension book from my site itself, then they will get the free CD, which will take them, called Fifth Dimensional Travel, which will guide them into the fifth dimension. And again, I'm working. I do a lot of work with the media, of course, in workshops and things. And I'm working with the concept of training people to be independent of me or my colleagues, and to learn to take charge of their life. I call this psychic empowerment. To be all they can be, and to not be codependent on drugs, on therapists, on anybody else, to do their own thing. You know, you can have a family, you can do your own thing, you can be a citizen of the world, fine. But if you're codependent and if you're fear-based, and if you're cynical and negative, if not paranoid, you're not going to have a very happy karmic cycle. And to me, my attitude is that lose the drugs, lose the negativity, focus in on the way the universe is designed. The universe is designed for our growth if we follow the rules. And by the way, primitive men, you know, Aborigines in Australia and any kind of primitive tribes that are around the world, Africa and South America, as well as Australia will have them, as well as some places of Indonesia too, you will find that most of these primitive people are pretty happy. They aren't sitting there going, hey, the bastards are stealing my business, you know. I mean, they're pretty happy because their lives are simple, and they're also meditating a lot. You know, Aborigines in Australia are out of the body most of the day. They're very well documented. The Sinoi tribe in Malaysia, the Malaysia Peninsula, is one of the most well-studied tribes going back to the 1930s. They are the most psychologically healthy people in the world. There are no psychotics on the Sinoi tribe in Malaysia. They're an Aborigine group. which are the middle group. There's one above them in technology or sophistication. There's one below them. But the CNRs are a good example of how you don't have to have a Lexus or a Mercedes or a BMW in the driveway and an estate to attain nirvana, okay? That you can be cool about things. So my point is that I just want people to learn to overcome fear, to use these techniques, especially fifth-dimensional ones like out-of-body travel. Occasionally teleportation is cool, accessing your higher self, your spirit guides, and to learn how to be like Dr. Positive, who's giving this presentation. And you're going to have I get a lot of criticism for my positivity, but you know something? I've never met a cynic, a person who's very negative, that's a happy camper. All they do or sit there with a sneer on their face, and their attitude is life sucks and then you die, okay? And my attitude is that life is beautiful if you use it the way it was designed. And the universe is designed really, if we follow the rules, for our own psychic empowerment and to give back if you want, do your thing, but to be positive, healthy, and live a good, long, strong life, and to do your thing without having other people dictate what you're supposed to be doing or to try to control you by fear. The only way people are controlled throughout history, and I'm talking about corporations, government, and religion, they all do the same thing. They understand human nature. It's very simple to understand it. It's all scare the kazooties out of them and you can control them. And my attitude is that, hey, guys, take a walk into the hairpiece floats. Empowerment. Lose the fear. You can only the only thing to fear is fear itself. FDR, right? Is that you learn to use your empowerment. You will have a better life, and the more you send out positive energy through the law of attraction, the more you're going to attract positive and spiritually uplifting aspects into your own life, which will affect everybody that you communicate with, which are thousands of people in your life that you will have some effect on. And to me, it's a win-win-win situation. And you can use this for abundance. I call this karmic capitalism. I wrote a book on that title to illustrate that. You can use it for healthing, for medical treatment, or for psychological, spiritual growth, abundance, relationship issues. You can do anything you want. There are no limits other than the ones that you as an individual so accept. Because to me, it's always a question of you have control over your life if you apply these principles. So that's really the message I'm trying to get across here.
Very wise words. I know we in the studio really enjoyed talking to you, and I know our listeners will have enjoyed tonight's show. We've got to get you over here, and we've got to get you back on the show.
Absolutely.
Really have.
Well, I would love to reincarnate, to use my experience here. I would be very happy because, like I say, I have been to the over the pond to your location there, and I love London. The people there were great, and as I told you, London or England in general, but especially London, the area around there, Glastonbury especially, not far, is also another example of teleportation cases like you wouldn't believe. You guys got experiences metaphysically there that you guys have ley lines, as we call that, that connect all these various structures, of course, like Stonehenge, etc. That, to me, I would look for an excuse to go there and to have some tea with you and scones and crumpets.
Yeah, and we'd make it 3 o'clock, not 4 o'clock for the tea, and everybody's blood sugars drop a wee bit. That's
we'll all be here wearing our bowler hats as well,
and curving our little fingers up.
And I won't forget to bring my umbrella. Okay?
Yeah.
But no. Seriously, I would love to do that, and you just keep in touch. And any project of yours is more than fun, and your audience, I'm sure, is going to be very simpatical with what I'm trying to do here. And they're all more than welcome to communicate with me. And those that email me, I personally respond to all of my emails, so I do not ignore people. There won't be some brain dead secretary answering the thing. It'll be me responding, and I'm very good at that. And by the way, on my site too, as well as YouTube, there are many classic clips from TV interviews and other things. People can see the various techniques that I do, including a time traveler, a contact, ET contacts, regression, progression. Jerry Springer's past life is on there, the talk show host, that I regressed. As well as progressed, all that's on there. So there's a lot of fun stuff on there. And there are many articles on my site, too, that gives you an idea of the various topics, as well as descriptions of various workshops I do and my 21 books, 150 some odd CDs, DVDs, everything is on there. So
It
as
is.
well as exercises, they can do themselves. They can try these techniques to see whether they want to do this in more detail.
I do really recommend the website. It is, I'll give it you again, but it is on our Facebook page and on planetxlive.co.uk, but it is drbrucegoldberg.com for more information on any of the doctor's work. Listen, we're going to go because we're pretty much out of time, but hopefully we will see you maybe on the astral plane this evening. And
Remember, AM, everybody on the astral plane always looks younger and thinner on the
thanks,
astral body.
darling.
Great.
Upper astral, by the way, just reinforce
yeah,
that.
we'll see you on the upper astral plane maybe later on tonight, and back on a future show very, very soon. But for now, thank you, Dr. Bruce Goldberg. Brilliant stuff.
Way.
This is Planet X. Planet X.
Wow, what a guy.
Wow, that was like AK-47 radio from our gorgeous Dr. Bruce
We've had a
Goldberg.
few guests like that, and I love it when you just leave them to it and they
We
just
went out
roll.
for pizza, didn't we?
Yeah,
We had to drive
halfway through the
around and-
interview. No, I love it. I love it.
Oh,
What a
terrific
great
guy.
speaker. And as we mentioned there, we will definitely get him back on possibly in September sometime.
I like very much, Neil, how he's into this. Let's break this pattern of dependency on therapists and the whole self-empowerment thing. But boy, I think I lost about a stone in the studio. It was terrific.
Yeah, and he's definitely going to be back on again soon. And do go and check out his website because it's very informative. There's some great stuff on there and some great techniques and advice about going to the upper levels of the astral plane.
Great sense of
you
humour
don't want
as
to go
well.
down below, do you? Right, that will do it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your company. Next week, we are talking to Gary Hesseltine. He's going to be on the show. That's going to be another interesting one. Until then, we'll catch you next week.
X marks the spot. This is Planet X. Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email. Find us on Facebook.
He's developed the field of progression hypnotherapy along with the superconscious mind tap, a healing technique through hypnosis, which again sounds fascinating, which we really want to get into and explore more. He is the world's foremost authority on futuristic time travelers. His books, Time Travelers from Our Future and Egypt, an Extraterrestrial and Time Traveler Experiment, are the only books written on true accounts of these futuristic time travelers.
In his book, The Search for Grace, a wonderful book, the book was based upon the actual history of a woman who solves her murder from a previous life in order to avoid the same fate in her current life. And this case has been fully documented and stands out today as one of the most documented cases of reincarnation. In Dr. Goldberg's own words, for several years I was a practicing dentist using hypnosis on my dental patients while maintaining a separate and full-time practice using hypnosis to regress patients into their future and past lives. As my reputation spread, I gave up my dental practice and became the country's only full-time hypnotherapist specialising in past life regression and future life progression, a field which he himself developed.
And to finally quote Dr. Goldberg himself, and I love this, your imagination is the only limit of your experience as you explore the magic of hypnotherapy, and he believes that by using hypnotherapy, almost anything is possible. And I love it, AMs, when we have guests on who are great speakers, who are passionate about the work, and also, very importantly, are keen to share that knowledge. And Dr. Bruce Goldberg certainly ticks all those boxes.
Wonderful.
Tonight's show is not only going to be a fascinating one, but we're going to learn some cool stuff as well. So I got to say, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, welcome to Planet X.
Well, thank you. Listen, you guys have to learn how to give a longer introduction to your guests.
Well, we
But
did.
by the way, I appreciate your referring to my dental background. Obviously, I'm retired from dentistry today, but you might say now I drill into the past and future.
I like that.
That's a good fun. I think it's important as well for our listeners to have a good understanding about your science background as well. That's well
Right.
orthodox science.
My science background is I have 3 degrees in sciences. I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. I have a dental degree from the University of Maryland, and I also have a master's degree in counseling psychology. So I look upon this field from 3 perspectives. One is the medical perspective, because I deal with a lot of psychosomatic illness and treating people. You have to understand the way the body works. And then there is also the mind-body connection. So my psychological training is important to understand the way our psyche and the way our mind works. But then the big picture here is to combine everything as more of a metaphysician and a New Age-oriented person to show you how our awareness in the universe is actually all based on energy. And a way to simply understand this without, people go up and down, all this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of philosophies out there. But just think of, I like to use the way the universe is constructed and created as a way of what we call a microcosm, macrocosm. 13.7 billion years ago, there was a big bang. Nobody argues about that, okay, in the field. They argue about the dates, a couple of 100 million years between friends, but So if the universe was created, what do you think came first, energy or matter? We know they're both interconverted from Einstein, from E equals mc squared. The answer is energy came first by 500 million years. So if God in his infinite wisdom or whatever created the universe decides to create energy first, that only supports the concept that energy is more important. Yes, I do recommend you take care of your physical body, believe me. But the big picture here is that we're an energy-based soul, and that's much more important than the physical body, because eventually your body will fertilize a lawn. The energy of your soul, which is eternal and cannot be destroyed even by conventional physics, will eventually reincarnate and occupy a new body. So the energy is everything. It's also used in healing, as we'll see, and traveling into different dimensions and doing all the fun stuff that's very spiritually growth-oriented. But it's all based on energy. So energy is everything with me. That's
wonderful. Could you tell us, before we go on a little bit further with you telling us more about that, in terms of your background, Dr. Bruce, how on earth did you come, first of all, to grow up with that interest originally in dentistry or science? And do you think, with having perhaps a scientific mind, you had at the time a little bit more of a left brain, as we would describe it, a little bit more of a left brain way of thinking? I don't know. What brought you to your original studies?
Well, my background is really unusual. In fact, my book, my updated version of the Past Lives, Future Lives book is called Past Lives, Future Lives Revealed. It gives a whole chapter on what I call my mission statement, and it gives you the details, but I'll give you a summary of it. When I was about 6 years old, I remember one of my teachers in grammar school, I was in first grade, and he was asking people in the class, all the kids in the class, what do you want to be when you grow up? And most of the boys in the class would say, I want to be an astronaut, a cowboy, a policeman, president, or whatever. And I said, I want to be a dentist. And I really don't know why when I was 6 years old, but that was always the thing in my back of my mind. I wanted to be a dentist. Okay. I had no interest in metaphysics at the time. When I was in high school and college, I was not into astrology or all the things that people were into the more New Age field. I was not against it. I just didn't really have the time, because my background is I come from a very poor background. I'm a self-made man. So I had to work my way through school, and I just didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of things that my contemporaries did. So when I was in college, I majored in biology, minored in chemistry, biochemistry major. And then when I was in dental school in my sophomore year, I still did not have any great interest in the New Age field per se, until I was dating a young woman who was a Leo, and I'm a Scorpio.
It's always a woman involved.
There's always a woman involved, okay? And we were having some problems, and I wanted to know why. And one of my friends said, you ought to check out the astrological things. And she's a Leo, and I'm a Scorpio, which is a terrible combination. So I checked it out, and I said, this is kind of interesting. I took a little astrology course. This was in Baltimore, Maryland at the time. And it really kind of worked. Everything was fine. And then I ran across a very complicated story, but I ran across a book called The Search for Bridie Murphy, which was a documented case of reincarnation that occurred in the 19th.
Each week, it could become weekly or nightly even, and you'll be able to join us on our Planet X Skype group to air your views. And it's going to be an open forum, so you can chat about almost anything. It could be the current show. It could be stuff going on in the news, whatever you like. That's the live forum, which is going to be starting very soon. There are more details on the Facebook group or by going to the website, planetxlive.co.uk.
Planet X. The truth is on air.
And let's get straight into it. We've got our special guest live from good old sunny California in Hollywood. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is on the line. But before we get him on, let's get into some of his background.
Thrilled to bits to have Dr. Bruce Goldberg on. Dr. Goldberg originally trained and worked for many years as a dentist and then trained as a hypnotherapist. And he originally did this to use techniques to help his patients relax. He holds a BA degree in biology and chemistry. He's a doctor of dental surgery from the University of Maryland School of Dentistry and has a master's degree in counseling psychology. Eventually, he retired from dentistry to devote full-time his rapidly expanding international hypnotherapy practice, specializing in past life regression and future life progression hypnotherapy.
He has been the author of 21 best-selling and award-winning books, including Past Lives, Future Lives. And now this is the book that was written on progression hypnotherapy, taking patients into their future lives. His second book, The Search for Grace, was actually made into a television movie by CBS. He's been on some of the biggest radio and TV talk shows, including The Oprah Winfrey Show, also Coast to Coast with the legend that is George Norrie. He's also conducted more than 35,000 past life regressions and future life progressions, which we'll get into a little later on if you don't know what that's all about. He's helped thousands of patients to empower themselves through the use of his techniques. He...
This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try to explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
Hi, I'm Neil Atkinson, and welcome to our weekly walk on the weird side. It is Planet X, where we cover everything from conspiracies to cover-ups, extraterrestrials to interdimensionals, the supernatural to the strange, and the suppressed news to the alternative views. And to help me out, we have our team of Planet experts. Tonight, I'm joined by the very lovely AMs and our special guest live from Hollywood. It's the brilliant Dr. Bruce Goldberg. We will be catching up with them very soon. Before we start the show, though, a couple of things to mention. We still have that competition running for the Exopolitics box sets. We've got DVD box sets for the second, the third, and the fourth British Exopolitics, plus 2 tickets to this year's event. So you can check that out online at planetxlive.co.uk. The other thing I wanted to mention before we start the show is something that we're going to be starting very soon called the Planet X Live Forum. I don't know anybody else who's doing this at the moment, so it could be another first for Planet X, but we're planning to put together a live Planet X Forum via Skype, hosted by our very own John O'Brien, who's going to be joined by other members of the Planet X team. How's it going to work? Well, the idea, and it is only going to be a pilot to start, so there might be a little bit of tweaking going on, but the idea is we're going to set a time and a night